recording now. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sarasota University's June colloquium. I'm Dr. Lindsay Pollack, Provost at Sarasota University, and tonight I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Levins, our university president. Mike, would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lindsay, and thanks to everyone for being here. We're so proud of the colloquium and particularly tonight with Elena, one of our esteemed graduates and just someone that is a valuable member of our community with a really important message for all of us to listen to. So again, thank you all for being part of this.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you for tuning in tonight from the UK. I know it's midnight where you are, so thank you so much for
Thank you.
staying up late to hear this important information.
I wouldn't miss it. Thank you.
Before we get started, I want to be sure to mention that we've just recently launched our dual enrollment option with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. So this is really an exciting time for the university as we are expanding and developing new partnerships. So I know many of our audience members watch the video after the fact. So if you are watching this later, please know that we at Sarasota are always available for you. Please email admissions@sarasotauniversity.edu and we'll get right back with you to talk to you more about the programs that we offer and the dual enrollment option. Currently, we're offering a Bachelor's of Science in Montessori Education. It is a bachelor's completion program. So if you have credits earned and or professional experience that you would like considered toward credit for the first 60 credits of your bachelor's degree, we encourage you to put that portfolio together, put that information together, and we will walk you through the process to get you on your way to your bachelor's completion. Additionally, if you have a Montessori credential, we can also consider that toward credit hours, toward either the Bachelor's of Science in Montessori Education or the Master's of Arts in either Montessori Education or Montessori Leadership. I do want to emphasize we are not a teacher preparation program, but we provide the fundamentals, the foundations of Montessori philosophy and methodology, and we'd love to partner with you. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Elena. Elena, it's my honor to introduce you this evening. Elena has spent her career in education with the bulk of the past 20 years spent as a Montessorian. Elena is an early childhood Montessori teacher who thrives on the combination of chaos and structure that comes with working daily with preschoolers. And Elena, you just exude joy. So I can only imagine you in a classroom with little ones. We're so happy to have you here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your message. Elena is a member of the Montessori Association of North Carolina's Education and Governance Board, and she's also a board member of the LGBT Center of the Cape Fear.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Dr. Levins. This is really exciting for me. So without further ado, this is a little bit about myself. I am a cisgender queer woman. I live in southeastern North Carolina. I'm from Durham, and I've been on the coast for the past, 13 years. I live in a relatively small, but thanks to ARP growing rapidly town. And, being queer in that small community is a thing that is a big part of what I navigate as both an individual and a teacher. I have my Montessori early childhood credential, and that's where I've spent the bulk of my teaching experience, but I am also one of the school's administrators. I work for a mid-size private Montessori school that currently has students 9 months through 9th grade. So as a director, I'm working with all the ages, and as a teacher, I'm really working with the 3 to 6-year-olds. Though this year I did quite a bit with the middle schoolers, and I found them surprisingly delightful. It was a shock, mostly to me. Couldn't believe it, but they're actually lovely. So I'll be with them sometimes next year too. I also, in addition to being a graduate of Sarasota's Montessori leadership program, I have been working as an adjunct professor with Sarasota for the past 6-ish months, and really loving that. So I have only rave reviews for what Sarasota is doing. I am a parent. I have a almost 4-year-old and an almost 8-year-old. So I am navigating, the early childhood experience through the dual lens of teacher and parent. My three-year-old is currently in my primary class, which has been a fun adventure for both of us. One of the things that you'll know if you're entangled with Sarasota is that it is a strengths-based program, and my top 5 strengths are developer, empathy, achiever, adaptability, and communication. And then for the, if this means anything to any of you, I'm an Enneagram 2 wing 3. I'm a Cancer sun and moon and a Virgo rising. And my hobbies include lots of things, especially birding. Lately, today, I'm visiting my sister in New Orleans, and I absolutely wiped out in a pile of mud, and then dinged one of my lenses. So I spent most of my day trying to take my lens apart and watching YouTube videos on whether or not I can fix it myself, or if I have to, sub somebody in, get Canon involved. So in this picture, it's a picture of myself and my 3-year-old from this year's Someone Special soiree. And I think that this picture is a good indication of how me personally, and as a school administrator and society at large, have evolved just in the past 10, 15 years on how we use language to be strategically, to be more inclusive and to be more accepting. When I started teaching, we had the tradition of the Mother's Day salon. So the Friday before Mother's Day weekend, I would, hey, bud, I'm in a meeting right now. Thank you. Sorry. Mom. So when I started at Peace Rose, it was the Mother's Day salon. We would invite all the mothers or grandmothers to come, and the kids would paint their nails, do their hair, all that. Over the years, we wanted to be more gender inclusive, so we changed the name to the Pampered Parent Salon. So parents were invited to come and be pampered by their children. And then there have been 2 more iterations. Last year, we changed it to the Someone Special soiree. And the reason that we made that shift was because we wanted to be inclusive of caregivers. And also, aunts and uncles and family friends that play a big role in the child's life. Anyone who is special to that child is invited to come and have their hair done and their nails painted. I did receive the critical feedback last year that a soiree is an evening gathering, and this is a morning event. So this year, I called it the Someone Special Shindig, and no one could argue with that. So I think this picture encapsulates a lot what we're going to talk about tonight, which is just that as we are, continuing to evolve as humans and members of society and educators, we can always change and adapt our language and our approach to be more welcoming and more inclusive and more celebratory. So it's not bad that 10 years ago we called this the Mother's Day Salon, but it's great that this year we called it the Someone Special Shindig. It is so many more people felt welcome and included and celebrated this year because it was an event for anyone who is important to that child. So tonight we're going to talk about a lot of how we are making and maintaining affirming spaces, both in our school and in our lives. And I just wanted to go over some language that we'll be touching on and define it for you if it is new language to you. So the first is the acronym that is we're gonna talk about the longest iteration of that. You'll see different iterations, different lengths. People regionally and personally have preferences, but we're gonna go with the most, and we'll go from there. So it's LGBTQIA plus. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual. And then the plus sort of gives room for the expansion of all of the subcategories. I think that one thing that's really cool about humans is how we continue to evolve and be critical and group and subgroup. And there are so many more words for how we identify with our bodies and ourselves and how we identify with our relationship to sexuality than there were 20 years ago when I was in high school. So I personally think it's wonderful, and I think it's a testament to that plus sign that there are so many options. Assigned sex at birth. This is the what it is what it is in the name. This is the assigned sex that someone is given at birth. That is a thing that is helpful at the moment of birth. Gender and biological sex can be fluid from that moment forward. Cisgender means that you identify your gender identity is aligned with your assigned sex at birth. Transgender is that your gender identity, your gender expression is not aligned with your assigned sex at birth. Non-binary is the idea that there is a gender binary, right? There's male and there's female, and then there's a lot in between. So there's the non-binary sort of is an umbrella term for people who are not identifying in a binary way with either gender, that are pulling from both or neither. Non-binary does fall under the trans umbrella, but not everyone who is non-binary will identify as transgender. Gender non-conforming is sort of an extension of that, where that your presentation, your gender expression doesn't conform with gender norms. And then gender identity and gender expression are sort of interlinked as well. So, your gender identity is the gender that you identify for yourself that speaks most strongly to you. And your gender expression is the presentation of that. So that's like, I am, somewhere in the category of like a chapstick lesbian. I am, I'm not one way or the other too far. That's sort of that gender expression. And then sexual orientation is who you are attracted to. We'll talk more about this later, but it is important to note that sexual orientation and gender identity are completely different things. I also had a funny conversation with my 8-year-old a few weeks ago, because he was made some comment off the cuff about how you can't be gay in high school. And I was like, well, talk to me about that. Why do you think that? And he was like, well, because you can't get married in high school. I was like, okay, cool. So actually your sexual orientation has nothing to do with your relationship status. So you can be, any sexual orientation, you have any sort of feelings, and that has absolutely no tie to whether or not you're in a relationship. We have other work to do on whether or not you can be in a relationship and be married. Obviously, he's really going straight for the finish line. But just the idea that your sexual orientation is yours, regardless of whether you have ever been in a relationship or have been in relationships with people of different genders, and that your sexual orientation has changed over time, or you're in a relationship that doesn't align with your sexual orientation, but that's how you identify your orientation presently. So those things are separate. Gender dysphoria and euphoria are the idea that your body and its appearance, its physical appearance, either because it misaligns with your gender can cause you dysphoria, or something about your body can cause you euphoria. So people who are transitioning will often talk about how a haircut or a style of clothing or makeup or a lack of makeup can cause them euphoria. They can bring them euphoria. So the idea that I've been feeling like I want to present in a more feminine way, and today I bought this new lipstick and it's making me feel so happy. It's causing me so much euphoria. And then inversely, a part of my body is not aligning with my gender identity and it is causing me dysphoria. And then finally, gender affirming care or treatment is medical care that helps people to, achieve their gender related goals. So, I'm completely blanking on the term, but essentially, yes, gender affirming care. So things like hormones, things like surgeries, those are gender affirming care. Cool. All right. So why does this matter? Like, why is this all important? One of the things that is important to talk about, especially during Pride. Pride is such a big celebration of the community, but it is also a time when we are shining a light on the queer community. As educators, we're shining a light on queer youth. LGBTQIA plus youth are at a higher risk of impacts to mental health and suicide. Having access to affirming spaces, to teachers and adults and peers where they are accepted and with whom they are safe, and the ability to express their gender identity when appropriate and when appropriate sexual preference has a positive impact on their mental health. There was a 2019 GLSEN, which is an organization that's like a gay support and gay rights organization, did a school climate study. And in that school climate study, 98% of students heard the word gay used in a negative way at school, which is a thing that I remember so strongly as a middle schooler. Like that was like, you would say like, oh, that's so gay. And it was always such a negative. And I think that I do believe that has changed quite a bit and that has come a long way. It's for sure less common than it was, but it definitely still exists. Trans youth report having access to affirming spaces reduces the odds of a suicide attempt or reporting a suicide attempt by 25%. So just having someone in their life, somewhere in their life where they are safe, has a very real impact on their mental health and their survival rates. Trans kids, trans adults have really high rates of suicide and negative mental health. And it's our job as educators to be proactive about providing safe spaces for them. And then finally, that 40% of the unhoused youth population is LGBTQIA+. So a lot of kids, especially teenagers who come out to their parents, are ejected from their homes and are kicked out. And that creates a huge problem where there are all these unhoused queer teenagers and they are experiencing all the hardships that come with being unhoused. Also, and I live in North Carolina, which is parts of it are fighting really hard to be regressive all the time. And I know, because we are Sarasota University, we talk quite a bit about what this looks like in Florida and in states where they have had success in limiting the rights of queer and trans people, especially in schools. But in the United States, only 9 states currently require that sex education be LGBTQIA plus inclusive. Some states go so far as to prohibit talking about queer sex in sex ed, or even require teachers to talk about it negatively. So there's so much work that we can do in order to make that more accessible and more safe. So here, we sort of talked about this a little bit, so we can breeze through this, but gender versus sexuality and sexual orientation. So your gender is your, how you identify sort of on the male, female gender binary. And that is completely separate from your sexual orientation. And while a lot of transphobic and anti-queer rhetoric argues that exposing children to trans identities is too mature, gender expression is completely separate from attraction or physical intimacy. So a lot of parents who are feeling angry about a book that talks about, 2 gay penguins or a little boy wearing a dress will say, like, stop sexualizing this for my kids. Like, you're making this too sexual. I don't want my kids exposed to mature content. And ultimately, those things are separate. It's always okay for us to celebrate kids exploring their gender through books and art and those sorts of things. And also, in the same way that we talk about all sorts of families, it is developmentally appropriate for us to talk about all sorts of families when we are talking in class. So, all right, cool. And then I would love to take a moment before we really dive into like how to create an affirming space to talk about our individual role in this. Our individual bias as educators is something that we should be continually examining. Each of us is moving through the world with bias and internalized beliefs and expectations of others. And that is true of like all sorts of bias, right? Like we're ableism and racism and gender bias. It is like we're all coming because of our lived experience. We're all coming preloaded with all of this bias into our daily encounters, into our classrooms. And in order for us to be the most effective teachers, our job is to be continually examining and fighting against those negative biases. So I think it's important every day to talk, to really look at, what are the thoughts that are popping into your head that are like, like the voice of bias, right? Those little thoughts that pop into your head. How are you examining those and resisting those? I think when we're talking about creating affirming spaces, a lot of people come up against bias about, what girls should do and can do and what boys should do and can do. I know that that's one that is the most common that I work with my teachers on staff about, where we talk about like, oh, well, little boys do X, Y, and Z, and little girls do X, Y, and Z. And even teachers who I know are very actively working to be inclusive will say things like, oh, well, little girls are so catty, or oh, little boys are so rough. And when we say those sorts of things, when we sort of perpetuate those ideas, we are creating gender expectations of our students in a way that doesn't serve them at all. It doesn't serve us at all. So it's a thing that we do at my school. Part of our annual in-service is that we, take different implicit bias quizzes, and we talk about the results, and we have some conversations about who in our class is triggering us in different ways, and how are we approaching that, and what circumstances have been challenging and why, and how are we going to be proactive about changing that. So as educators, I want to encourage you always to be learning and growing. So what an affirming space is sort of a amorphous idea, right? Because we're going to talk about literally a physical space, your classroom or your school. And then we're also going to talk about like being an affirming space, being that safe person. So I'm going to speak from my perspective and my experience, and I'm going to acknowledge that you are all in different schools. You're in different states. You might be in a community that is way more accepting generally than mine, or you may be in a community that's way less accepting than mine. You might be in a private school where you don't have any real control over your classroom, or, like even in my county, they just banned flags. Teachers are no longer allowed to hang flags in their classroom. And so like, that might be your experience, or you could be someone like me. And if you're someone like me who has the most possible power, I want to encourage you and empower you to make these changes because you have control. So I am the administrator of a school, which means that I have like the most power over what happens at the school. So if you are also a school administrator, perhaps if you're part of Sarasota's school leadership track, this is a really great opportunity for you to exact lasting impact. You can create those affirming spaces on your campus. If you're not, and you're in a situation where you can't hang a flag in your classroom, and you can't have stickers on your water bottle, and you really can't change much about your physical space, then we'll talk about how you yourself can be an affirming space and what you can do to be accepting and celebratory of queer youth as an individual. So an affirming space, you know, in a classroom, I think a lot of it is just setting the norms and expectations in the environment. So your classroom culture, how you're talking to the kids, how the kids are talking to each other, your job as a teacher, especially when you are teaching in the older grades, is to always be fluid and be examining, and like you've got your finger on the pulse of like what they're talking about and how that's going. And so your job is to make sure that that classroom culture is affirming for LGBTQIA youth. The like a lot of this is like the language that you're using and the way that you're talking about gender and sexual identity, and mostly just normalizing it. So much of it is just normalizing it. And I think that that's a thing that we have. I'm so sorry. There's literally a recorder happening in the background. My apologies. If you can hear that, I'm sorry. If you can't, great. I'm at my sister's house. There are 4 kids playing a recorder. It's a jam band here. So the language that you can use to create normality for these subjects with students are things like when kids say, and this is, so for preschool age, for example, when kids say like, you can't wear pink because you're a boy, you can say anyone can wear pink. Pink is a color for all of us. When they say things like, girls have vulvas and boys have penises, which is like, you know, a win already if they're actually using the correct language. Often they don't. Then you say, actually, everyone's body is different. Some girls have penises, some girls have vaginas. Moving on. When they say, you're a girl because you have long hair, you say, you can't tell someone's gender by the way that they look. Anyone can have any length hair. That doesn't determine their gender. So there's just like you're creating this as a norm through these conversations. And obviously, you want to help, if you have the control to do this, helping the parent community to be comfortable with a lot of this language is a slow process over time. So I definitely don't think that if you're in like a Florida public school, you should go to school on Monday and be like, girls have penises, because that will get you in hot water. But if you have the control and if you've created the classroom culture and if you have the parent community that can support that, you can say things that are affirming in that very like hands-on way. A lot of what it comes down to is just relieving the pressure gasket of gender that has been created by society. So I have 2 sons, and the number of onesies we got when my older son was an infant that said like lady killer and #1 stud and I love trucks and things like that, where like it was massive. And I was so surprised because like, this is an infant. He's not a lady killer. He is a baby. And I think that we as a society have so much inherent just presence of gender and traditional gender norms in everything that we do. In the same way, you know, it's like when we say that boys are so rough and girls are so catty, we're only giving our girls permission to fight in a emotional way. And we're only giving our boys permission to fight in a physical way. And in actuality, they're gonna all fight in different ways all the time if given the space to do it. And so relieving this pressure gasket of in both a positive and a negative way, right? Like you want to have the same boundaries and consequences for girls and boys, both equally. Everyone has the same expectations. You can't kick someone just because you're a boy. You can't throw a truck just because you're a boy. You can't tell someone that you hate them and they're not invited to your birthday party just because you're a girl. Everyone has the same rules. And then also in a celebratory way, right? Like we're building them up. We're empowering them to do different things. We're empowering our boys to be sensitive and in touch with their emotions and in touch with their feelings. And we're empowering our girls to be a little rough and tumble and wild. Like, I want you all to be skinning your knees. I want you all to be uninviting people to your birthday party. That's normal development. So it's important for us to just give them space to be all of those things. And remember that depending on the community that you're working with, your one voice, or maybe just a small group of voices in a sea of gender norms. So like, I am lucky, I have, worked really hard to create a pretty progressive school. And I'm still really fighting an uphill battle on a lot of the gender norms. And I can't get mad at the kids when they come in and they say things like, only boys have short hair. Because I know I didn't teach them that, but like the world is telling them that. And so if I were to react to that in a shamey way and say like, no, that's not true, then all I'm doing is creating shame and uncomfortable feelings and shutting down that open communication and creating a wall there. So in the same way that we have natural consequences, in the same way that we are like okaying the feelings and moving on, when I just say, actually, anybody can have short hair, and then we move on, it's not making it a conflict. It's just a correction, and we move forward. We had a parent coach that I have often found as a teacher that parents don't want to listen to me. They want to hear a different professional tell them the same things that I would tell them. So years ago, we had a parent behavior coach come in and do a parent night. And one of the things that she said that I really loved was that you should deliver things with a pass the butter face. Where you would say like, oh, actually anyone can have short hair. Would you please pass the butter? Like, it's just like not a conflict at all. We're just like, we're having a nice conversation. Would you pass the butter? And I thought that was really nice. And then, so that's sort of like, emotional, creating the cultural norms, creating the sense of community that is inclusive and affirming. And then it is also the physical things. So like, if you have control and power to make the bathrooms gender neutral, that's a really big way that you can be gender affirming, especially for kids as they're getting older. If you have the ability to take some of the gendered language down from signage and things like that, that can be really powerful. Then what you're adding to the classroom, do you have the ability to fill your classroom with books that are inclusive, materials that are inclusive, art that is inclusive? It's so impactful to children of every background when they see themselves and their families represented in the teaching materials that they interact with the books, especially that they interact with the movies that they see, and those sorts of things. It's like one of the reasons it's so important for a classroom library or school library to include books that have, main characters of different races just living their regular kid lives and not doing things that are, tied to negative aspects of that race. But it's true also for queer kids. Like, it's important for them to see books where the kid has two moms or two dads, or a non-binary parents, or single parents, or grandparents, or like all of those sorts of things. That's important in the family, the representation of family that we are offering kids. And then it's also important for there to be books about kids experimenting with gender norms and having, as they get older, having crushes on people of different genders. It is that presence helps. It is a light for the kids who need it, and it normalizes it for the kids who don't need it. So for the kid who has two moms, it feels magical to them. For the kid who has two moms, it feels magical to those moms at the end of the day to get that note home that like, we read mommy and mama and me in the middle. Like, that is like huge. It's impactful. And then for the kids who don't have two moms, it is normalizing that experience for them in the classroom. They just see it as another way that family looks. And the more that you can just normalize it without it being like a big thing, the more impactful it will feel. Because also, making a big deal of something is a way of othering. So if we're like, well, everyone remember that Jacob has two dads, we're reading this book because Jacob has two dads. Like, that's just going to make Jacob feel weird. if we just read a book about about a family with two dads, and we don't mention Jacob and we don't mention anything else, and this is just another way that we're presenting a family and another thing that we're looking at, just like every other family book, then that will feel normal for Jacob. He will feel comfortable moving forward. So that's an important way that you can just allow them to have access to that touchstone. At the end of the presentation, I have some links, and I will put them in the chat as well. I last summer worked on a big book guide that I am happy to share with you that has books for all different ages, sort of from infant through secondary 1. And it's so important that that representation exists in every age group. You know, in the toddler age group, it's just as available and accessible as it is in the secondary age group. And obviously the conversations about gender and sexuality are different in different age groups, but the presence of materials and the presence of the conversation isn't. It should be there all of the time. And I think that I often have as similar conversations with my, middle school students about gender and sexuality and, those sorts of things as I do with my preschool students. So actually the conversation doesn't change very much, but I will share a link to the book list at the end because I do think it's a really great resource. Finally, if you have the ability to create, when we were in high school, they called it a gay straight alliance, which I don't think is such a thing anymore. They call them now like rainbow clubs or things like that. But if you have the ability to create a club that allows queer youth to gather in a safe way and in a safe place, that is incredibly helpful and gives those kids such an immediate, direct source of power and such a sense of safety. If you are not in a school where that is an option, or you're not in a school where the administration or the state is friendly to a student alliance, a queer student alliance, a lot of local centers, like I'm on the board of the local LGBT center, and we have a youth group that meets. We have 2 different youth groups that meets. So connecting students with resources and educating yourself on what's available in your community. Our center has a youth group that meets weekly, and then we also have events like we have a queer prom for a queer youth prom, so that the kids could come to a completely safe place, surrounded and protected by safe adults, and celebrate in a way that felt, true to them and how they wanted. And I think that in Wilmington, at least, it's a mixed bag on how the school proms would be, but going to a completely queer youth prom allows them to be everything that they want to be without any concerns of negative impacts with their school peers. So it's very possible that your local LGBT center, if you have one, will have events like that. So if you could say, oh, this doesn't exist at school, but here's some resources that you can take advantage of outside in the community. And I know that there's typically a huge push to make those things free and accessible for youth because so many queer youth don't have the support of their parents and aren't able to access, financial support for events like that. And then the flip side of that is how you can be an affirming space. So how you can signal to students that you are a safe place for them, an advocate for them. It's really important, we were talking about this earlier with the bias, like it's really important for us as adults to operate from a place that is, free of shame, that is medically accurate, culturally responsive, and LGBTQIA plus inclusive. So it is, I said at the beginning of the talk that this is the thing I love about modern society. And it is also a thing that's challenging about modern society is that it is constantly the way that we talk about sort of these cultural signifiers, these identity pieces is constantly changing. And that can feel frustrating for adults. I think I'm in my late 30s, and I often have moments where I'm like, like I have a friend who is a college professor, and one of her students was like, nobody says queer anymore. We say gay. And I was like, I remember when queer was the new thing. We did say, we moved to that. And so I think it's like, it's really, it's ever evolving in a way that can feel exhausting or frustrating or scary. I think a lot of people just are too scared to be wrong and too scared to be corrected to say anything. And so I think that can be really daunting for people. And I encourage you to feel comfortable, work on feeling comfortable being corrected, work on feeling comfortable being wrong. As long as you are wrong from a place of learning and not wrong from a place of, anger or hate, it's okay to be wrong. And that's true of so many things. If you get someone's pronouns wrong, and they correct you, like, that's okay. That happens all the time. As long as you say, oh, I'm so sorry, and then you use the correct pronouns moving forward, you didn't do anything wrong. Everything is great. If you're purposely you're using the wrong pronouns for someone, like, that's hateful. Don't do that. But everyone is going to make mistakes. Everyone is going to occasionally mess up, and that's okay. And so giving yourself the encouragement to continue learning, and also giving yourself the permission to grow, is a really important part of the process. And like, for those of you who teach the older age students, like, some of what they say is just nonsense. They're saying things like skibbity Ohio Riz, and I don't know what that means. And I don't want to know what it means. That's between them and each other. I don't need to learn these things. So I really, like, some of what they say is going to be like completely contradictory to what you know, and you have to learn it. And some of what they say is going to be completely contradictory to what you know, and you just have to be like, okay, cool. Like, that's true for you. That's not true for me. And I think that that's a thing that is prevalent in, for sure, many communities, but also the queer community, is that, like, we love that these kids have so much freedom to try on gender, to experiment, to learn. We love that it's safer for them. We love that it's more available to them. And also, that doesn't change our experience, and it doesn't erase our experience. And I think that we get to hold those things as separate as adults. Like, we get to be like, I remember my high school experience and how that shaped me. And I am celebrating that these kids have a different high school experience, and that's shaping them. So I think that, generationally, those sorts of things can feel overwhelming, but it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to learn. Using inclusive language, especially pronouns, is hugely important in being affirming. I have a student who joined our school mid-year this year, who transitioned out of public school because the child transitioned and was, no longer comfortable. And one of the things that she and mom talked to me about while they were touring was just that the teacher had done an amazing job. That, like, in the school, the teacher was really restricted on, like, what could change, like what functions of the day could change, what bathroom she was allowed to get, like, those are things were limited. But that the teacher was making such an effort. The teacher always respected her pronouns. The teacher was really warm and inclusive and wonderful. And ultimately, the child left because the other kids and their parents were not being gender affirming, and that was getting to be really stressful for the kid. And she wanted to be in an environment where she could start fresh as herself, and without some of that stigma. And, that is absolutely understandable. And I feel so thankful for that teacher. It feels so nice to me to hear that at one of our local elementary schools, there was a third grade teacher who was trying the hardest to support this kid despite a lot of restrictions. So no matter what you're up against as a teacher in your specific school environment, you can always control your personal language. And if the rules are prohibiting you from using, say it's a binary transgender child. So if the rules are prohibiting you from using their she, her, he, him pronouns, you can just switch to gender neutral pronouns. I can say, I can never use any gendered pronouns. But I'm absolutely capable of that. So I can always switch to make it a step more inclusive. Again, that's a thing that has evolved and changed so much in both good ways and bad ways. And I think that I personally hope that a lot of the like wave of laws and restrictions and policies that we've seen the past few years are a fear response to a larger societal shift. And so I do think that I believe in my heart we're on a good path towards a lot more being open and available and affirming. So one of the things that we can do as individuals is to create a culture of confidentiality with our students. And that's, that's a tricky line depending on where you are and where, what the laws are in your state. So I do encourage you to familiarize yourself with the actual restrictions on you as a teacher. I know some states are passing a like you must tell parents type policy for students. And what I will say is that if you are in a place where you have a, must tell sort of rule, I would encourage you to make that known to kids and to say in blanket statements, like the rules in this state are that if you tell me, something about your gender identity, I have to tell your parents. So you can talk to me about lots of things, but if you're not ready for that conversation to go to your parents, please don't tell me. Being upfront, being honest with your kids about how you want to support them and you want to be there for them and what you're actually bound to do and what your actual restrictions are. If you have the power to be a source of confidentiality for students, that's really wonderful. I think a lot of kids, a lot of queer youth don't come out at home first, that school is the first place that they come out, often to peers first and then teachers, sometimes to teachers first. And so when a child comes out to you in any way that can be coming out in their gender identity or their sexual orientation, your first step is always to ask them who knows and who they want to know. And so in the next slide, we'll talk about a gender support plan, but just knowing that for a lot of kids, it's not safe for their parents to know, and holding that weight is, it's a heavy and important thing that we can do when we are affirming spaces for children. And then, if you are in an administrative position, so if you have the ability to impact or control hiring and staffing, one of the most impactful things you can do to create affirming spaces in your school is to hire with representation as a priority. And that is true of all things. Kids are the most effective and feel the most supportive when they have teachers who look like them, who have backgrounds like them, who come from communities like them. And so having a finger on the pulse of your local community and hiring in a representative way is really important. And that includes, when you're thinking about diversity and you're thinking about representation and staffing, like I encourage you to also include LGBTQIA teachers. So making sure that you are hiring those people on the staff, because ultimately the most affirming teachers and the safest places for queer youth will be queer adults. And those are the people that the kids will know that they are safest with. And so making sure that if you have that power to hire in that way, that can be incredibly impactful. And then, there are like little things about yourself that you can do. I have on my school keychain, I have like all the different rainbow flags lanyard. And I walk around campus and I have that on, and it's just like a little visual sticker or a little visual symbol of that I am a safe person, and like we're a pretty small school community, and my kids are at school. So like my family is a part of the school community. So my own identity is known, I think, without like throughout the school community, but in a bigger community, you can represent, you can signal in those sorts of small personal ways. Different, like, you know, I have like flag earrings and things like that, that just symbolize that you are a safe person. So a gender support plan, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a collaborative plan between the school and the students on how they are going to help the child navigate their gender identity with peers, with teachers, and when applicable, with parents. Also at the end, I will have some links to how to make gender support plans. There are some really great resources and like forms that you can use to model. So when we were building our form for school, you know, I looked at a bunch of different ones and I sort of pulled what I wanted from all of them to create our gender support plan. And the goal is just to give clear guidelines. And that's really, really important, because sometimes kids will, honestly, sometimes kids and adults will have a hard time self-advocating. And was at the dentist the other day, my 8-year-old, was having a cavity filled, and the dentist was drilling, and Everett was like, "What's that noise?" And she was like, "Oh, you know, I'm just getting the sugar bugs out." You know, it's like when your dad drills. And Everett looks at me for a moment and he goes, "I don't have a dad." And the dentist goes, "I don't know, do you have an uncle?" And I was like, what if, like, when your mom drills, like, your mom does lots of things, would be a great moment. But like Everett, in that moment, I watched him like freeze and not know what to do and how to respond. And he did great. He did a fantastic job, but it was definitely like, in those moments, like, you never know what they're going to share, what they're going to say, how they're going to feel. And so, you know, supporting them, so that all the adults having the right information. So giving the kid the opportunity in private to say, this is how I want the adults to respond when X, Y, and Z happens. Then the adults have that knowledge, then they can support the kid in the situation where, you know, kids are arguing about how every family has one mom and one dad, and the kid who has two moms or two dads is getting upset, then the teacher can step in and be like, "Oh, actually, you know," and that's different than a gender support plan, but still, like, that you're stepping in that moment and you're supporting. In a moment where someone's saying, "No, you're a girl because you have a vulva," then the teacher can step in and be like, "No, actually, you know, Sophie uses he, him pronouns, and, you know, Sophie identifies as a boy," and you can, like, once you have permission from the student to advocate and support in that way, you can step in and do it. So I do encourage you to look at sort of what permissions are available in your county for gender support plans, what the protocol is, if there is one. Our county has a protocol for creating a gender support plan. It's a pretty, you know, pretty basic one, but it's wonderful that it is in place. And then if you're in a position where you have a leadership role at your school, you can create one and you can sort of shape what that process looks like if it hasn't already been created. And so that is that. If you have any questions, this is my email address, and you are welcome to, I see that there are some chats in the chat box. You are welcome to email me or reach out to me, and I'm happy to sort of chat privately, or we have a few minutes we can talk now as well. And then these are the resources I mentioned. I will put these in the chat box. Why don't I work on that? So, all right, wonderful. I'm
Awesome.
gonna stop.
And they will be included in the recording, Elena. And
Perfect.
we can also send those out when we let our wider group, when we share the link to the video.
Awesome. That is great. Thank you, Lindsay.
Awesome.
So
Well, we have time for a couple questions. If anyone has any feedback or a question for Elena. We have some great information in the chat. I did include the website for GLSEN, the
Thank
Gay,
you.
Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. We had a GLSEN chapter at my school, and in the Houston area, GLSEN is pretty well known and well organized.
Yeah.
And Bill Summers has included some resources of summaries of books. Thank you, Bill.
Wonderful. Thank you. I also just put in a link to the reading list.
Excellent. Thank
So
you.
that is in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Well, Elena, thank you again for this very important information. And thank you for your time and commitment to students everywhere.
Thank you.
And to our community of learners here this evening, and to the wider audience who will be watching this later on. I do want to remind everyone that Sarasota now has a bookstore. So I'm sporting my new Sarasota t-shirt. Our fabulous Jordan Corley in marketing has designed a number of fun items. So go to the website to get your Sarasota swag and apparel.
That's awesome.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to share for the good of the group this evening before we end? Well, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. And again, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Thank you so
See
much.
you next month. Oh, and Heather White is our speaker next month. Heather is a Montessori guide. She's 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 trained. She's also a nationally certified school psychologist. So she'll be sharing with us strategies to support mental health in the classroom and some ways for us to be spiritually well and ready for the new school year. So I hope to see you in July. Again, thank you for being here tonight and see you next month.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks, Miss Elena.
Thank you so much.